You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 193. Today, we finish our conversation with Broadway lighting designer Jane Cox. We discuss keeping overhead low, Penny Remsen, one of Jane's lighting mentors, paying for assistance and drafting out of the design fee, paying theater designers hourly, a dream that Jane and I think could be a reality, and two recent design fees that Jane had, one for an opera and one for an off-Broadway musical. This is part 2 of the interview, so if you want to hear that first part, be sure to back up one episode. Today is the 4th of July here in the United States. Now, I'm in the suburbs of St. Louis, and people are already shooting off fireworks, even though it's daytime and you can't see them, so I don't quite understand the point. But hey, I've never been a firework shooter-offer person. Anyway, I don't know if the mics are going to pick that up, but if so, that's what that is. However you are spending the day, I hope that you are doing something you love, like spending time with your family or drinking an ice cold lemonade or maybe just watching some fireworks. Now, if you're not in the USA, I still hope that you get some time to relax this summer as well. Now, because it's the 4th of July, that means that I am less than a month away from my deadline to find investors for False Steps, a ballroom comedy that is running off-Broadway this fall. I'm an associate producer on the show, and I have to finalize investors by August, which is less than 4 weeks away. So if investing in theater is something that you're interested in doing, specifically off-Broadway, stick around to the end of the episode, and I'll explain a bit more. If you're not interested in investing, but you want to see the show, I have great news. Tickets are now on sale. Now, we're running the month of September at the theater at St. Clement's, and you can find tickets for that at falsestepscomedy.com. Now, I'm probably going to mention these tickets on sale during every single episode from now up until we close, unless, of course, we sell out, in which case I'll stop mentioning it. But if you get annoyed with me talking about this show, I'm sorry, but hey, as a producer on the show, I really want to sell tickets. All right. As always, there is a video of this interview on YouTube. Find a link to that and everything that Jane mentions in the description box of this episode or at artisticfinance.com/193. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
You said that your tax rate was close to 50%, and I'm so grateful for you to say that because on this show, I always say 30%. You get paid $1,000, save $300 of it because that's what you have to pay to taxes.
Well, that's good advice. That is good advice.
But you're saying 50%, and I'm so glad for that because, like, mine is pretty darn close to 30% all the time. And so I'm like, who are these people that are, like, getting it lower or XYZ? I think on our tax document, the effective tax rate says 25 point something.
Well, I don't think the effective tax rate ever said 50%, but when you actually added up the income and then added up how much they wanted in taxes between the business tax, the living in New York City tax, the, earning in New York City tax. I mean, simply moving to New Jersey made a big difference. And then, getting into the owning property makes a huge difference because then the biggest piece of living in this, the most expensive piece of living in this house is actually property taxes. And you can deduct them. But if you're a renter, no, you can't. Even if that property tax is being passed off to you as part of the rental. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Property tax. See, that's another racket with the country.
Totally.
Oh, how do you have a good school? Well, you see, we don't fund the schools, but we do it through the property tax. So if you live in a place that has high property taxes, you get a good school. Yes. And if you don't, I'm sorry, you don't get a good school.
That's correct. Princeton, New Jersey is the epitome of that. High property taxes, great schools. Yep.
But anyway, we love this country.
We love
yeah.
It's been good to me on so many levels. But the financial system is not one I would advocate.
All right. Working with assistants or even fellow designers, do you ever help other people negotiate pay or talk about it with them?
Yes. I mean, I try to be very direct and upfront with especially younger people. And the older I get, the more I do that. Because I think the finances of it are so complicated. So yes, I'm usually very much in the negotiation about pay with assistants and associates, unless there are associates that I could really learn from, like Nick Solium. Have you ever had Nick Solium on your podcast?
I haven't, but I'll add.
Oh, you should.
We've interacted, but I need to get him on. Yeah,
he's wonderful. Also has a young child, not as young as yours, and really kind of understands how to navigate, those things like the kit fee and the draft day, like really understands the money of it. He would be wise. He would offer wise advice to young designers, I think. So yes, I do think about that very hard. And as I said, I try to pay people a living wage. And that is typically more than what the theater thinks it is. So then trying to figure out, where that additional money is going to come from. And this is something I feel complicated about because I understand the ramifications that it has on the rest of the profession for people who are truly freelance. But typically I'm paying people out of my own pocket, on a project in addition to whatever the theater is willing to chip in. That's not true necessarily on Broadway, but otherwise, almost the rest of the time, almost always. Now, some of that is because maybe I need them to do more because I do actually have a full-time job at Princeton, so some of that's on me. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. And just for an example, are you paying them extra for them to take the gig, or is it you're like, can you draft more or?
So I really, these days, I try to pay people by the day or even by the hour if I can. I've said for a long time, I think designers should get paid by the hour. And everyone is always horrified by that thought. I mean, designers are horrified by that thought, but I feel like, no, we would really be doing much better if we got paid the same way that moving light programmers did,
Well, sorry. And in the prep part, like drafting a show, if I could log into a portal and as I'm drafting, it would be counting my hours and so I can pay those, that would be amazing for me.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
I wake up from 2 to 4 in the morning because I do this sometimes and I draft for a couple hours. If I could bill for that, it'd be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I would really advocate for designers to be paid that way. I understand there's complications with it, but I think it would be better for us. I don't think it has served us well, for the most part, to sort of claim artistic ownership. I mean, I like that piece of it on some level, but I would trade it away for financial stability in a heartbeat in this profession. We experimented. So in my job at Princeton, I'm the director of the theater program. And for the first 5 years, I was also kind of artistic director, producer of our season. And we experimented briefly there with paying designers by the hour because I wanted to see if in fact, Sam Pinkleton directed a show and Stacey Derosier was the lighting designer. And we experimented with doing it by the hour. Now, this was during COVID, so the whole thing happened on Zoom, which made it slightly different, but it seemed like a good time to experiment. And we, I think, decided on $50 an hour, and then we put a cap of hours on it because we did, of course, have a budget on the university end, And I thought that was fantastic. I felt good in my soul about it, I felt like we were not taking advantage of this person. I wish every theater project was paid by the hour. Designers should be paid by the hour. That's my statement. For the day.
I love this because I think the only arguments I've heard against that are sort of autonomy, but I'm you can still have autonomy working hourly.
Totally.
And then ownership of the design.
Right.
And I feel like there's still a world in which you can own the design, but also as a design, what is the point of me owning a lighting design when it's connected to the show? So like, what good is it for me to take my lighting design for like Death of a Salesman and then go put it for Legally Blonde? It's like, it's without all the pieces, it makes no sense. So like, why do we care? I mean, I understand a little bit why we care. And then the other thing is like the additional weekly compensation for Broadway. It's like, oh, there's complications, but you cannot tell me that there is not a way in which you can get an hourly pay and then get a bonus. Like in the corporate world, there's all these bonuses going around. Can you not just call additional weekly compensation a bonus?
Right.
Anyway, so I feel like all the objections to the hourly thing are for things that can get sorted out.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it could be sorted through. Yes, I can see why occasionally on Broadway that might mean one ended up making less money. But the amount of other situations that you would get paid more money in far outweigh that, I think. For most people. I mean, there may be a handful of designers who'd be like, oh God, no! Whose shows are still running, 7 years later. But those people are very much the anomaly.
Exactly. Like if they took a poll of all lighting designers, those people would be like less than 1%. So
exactly,
they wouldn't win.
Exactly.
Jane, I'm loving this. I'm going to skip some questions just to make sure. I just want to sort of like get through it all, and then if we have time, I'll go back. So
because your child might wake up any second.
Exactly. Do you have an entity, a corporation, an LLC, anything like that? Cool. And then right now, or I guess what percentage, even now with your full-time gig, is your income W-2 versus 1099?
Well, obviously my Princeton job is W-2, and that accounts for, 3/4 of my income. So the vast majority of it is W-2. Even in the theater now, it's about half and half. But when I was still freelance, 10 years ago, it was almost exclusively 1099s. Now in the theater, it's more about half and half.
Okay, got it. So then are you still paying taxes quarterly, or do you not need to do that?
I don't anymore. I have an additional chunk taken out, like additional withholding from my Princeton paycheck to account for the freelance work I'm going to do.
I love it. Do you file your own taxes?
No. We pay people to do it. We've always paid people to do it, yes. Although we're in the market for a new person if anyone's got great ideas. We were with a company who had someone we really liked, and that person left the company, so we're looking for new.
All right. Well, I'll just say artisticfinance.com/resources.
Oh,
There's
great.
An accountant's.
Fantastic.
You can browse through. You probably see your old people there. And then like, oh, Ethan, take them off the list. Okay. So retirement, we've talked about it a little bit, but what does your retirement picture look like? Like, what are all the pieces?
Yeah. So Princeton has a retirement plan that they put into, which is pretty generous. And then they also have a retirement savings plan that we're paying into. So that's the biggest piece of it. I was looking at these questions, with my daughter, who's going to be better with money. And she was like, well, is it a Roth or a traditional? And I was like, I have no idea. So we opened the computer to see, and I can't remember.
I would venture a guess that both of those are traditional.
Okay, great. Yes, I think that's probably true. It's a pretty standard. Princeton has a pretty standard kind of retirement setup. And then the union pension, and then Social Security, if there's still such a thing.
There will be. I had a blip. I just had one blip. So for this podcast has been going on for over 5 years. I have always said Social Security is going to be there. It's going to be there.
Okay.
I had a blip a couple weeks ago, and I said, maybe it's not. It's the first time I've ever been like, maybe it's not. But I'm forget that blip. Social Security will be here when you retire, Jane.
Okay, great. Because, well, as I was, so you get these free financial planning sessions, right? When you work at Princeton, they offer you, with their retirement company, right? But like free. So I did one, and I was like, well, what if the economy collapses? And the guy was like, listen, if the economy collapses, you have bigger problems. So I was like, okay, fair enough. Moving on.
That's amazing. Okay, awesome. Well, I feel like that's all wonderful. Outside of retirement, you talked about a house, which isn't an investment, but also it's capitalism, so I count it.
Yes.
But
Yep.
outside of your retirement and your house, do you invest in anything?
No. I don't even understand it, you know? I mean, it seems like it would be a really bad idea for me to get into investing since I have no idea. Like, it feels like something that other people should do on my behalf, which is functionally what retirement package is. So, no, it doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe it should, but I don't know. At this point, I'm 54. I think I'm not going down that road now. Yeah.
Jane, I totally agree with you because for this show, we have a series of episodes called the 6K Investing Special. And I chose investments 4 years ago. And I will just say I should not be picking investments.
Okay, great. Thank you for affirming my feeling that, like, really people who pay attention to this all the time should probably be in charge of that, even though you can't be sure they have your best interests at heart. In fact, they almost certainly don't. But
they at least there's rules. So yeah,
there's
hopefully
rules.
you're as safe and protected as you can be.
Right.
Okay. Do you give to charity or do you give back to the universe in any way?
Yes. So my favorite charities: Planned Parenthood, public radio and or television at different times. And then like hyper local ones. There's a place called the Watershed around here that protects water and does lobbying, on behalf of clean water. And there's another organization around here called Homefront, which is for homeless and home insecure people in the Mercer County area in New Jersey. I'm also a big fan of the 152nd Project, Beowulf Barrett's 152nd Project. So when I do Broadway shows, I always put in my 152nd into that. And then in terms of giving back to the theater, I feel like, well, I try and pay the people that work for me properly, which usually means that I'm a producer on the show. So, but I'm not a member. I was so impressed listening to Don Holder's talk and that he's like a volunteer paramedic, fireman. I was like, okay, that's wonderful. That is wonderful. I don't do anything like that.
Yeah, that's wild is all I'll say. That
amazing.
Is wild.
Although I will say, running the Princeton Theater program is a sort of a cross between, running a summer theater camp for kids. I mean, it's its own, even though I'm very well compensated to teach at Princeton University, and running a theater program is a form of volunteering. I mean, it's an all-consuming, if you do it right, it's an all-consuming thing with all kinds of people. And we involve our local community quite a lot. So we do, big community. We do public work shows where we invite the community to participate. We do a lot of work through the Princeton Theater program with middle and high schoolers from a neighboring city that has less resources than Princeton does. We work with, formerly incarcerated citizens. We do all kinds of things with various communities that, there's an enormous amount of, it's not volunteering because Princeton pays me very well, but none of it is what Princeton pays me to do, if that makes sense. Like, we have an enormous amount of energy, goodwill, and enthusiasm among the student, faculty, and staff body in the theater program, and we do a lot that's beyond kind of running a theater program for our students. So that has been, for the last 9 years, but an enormously satisfying and rewarding way of sort of being in this community.
That's amazing. And that's actually a conversation I'm going to have with somebody on the show talking about academia. And one of the things they wanted to make sure to talk about was the unsubsidized work that professors and faculty and staff and all put into it. Like, if you counted all the hours that are like not part of any sort of this structured stuff, it's a crazy amount of, if you put it in financial terms.
Yeah.
It is like,
if you did, yes.
Like, if you were like, for every one of those hours, if I were paid just minimum wage, it's incredible.
It's exciting. Well, at Princeton, it's exciting because Princeton is really well-resourced, right? So the faculty at least get paid very well. And we have these incredible spaces and equipment. And so, for example, one of the things we do with the Trenton middle and high schoolers is we have this amazing Saturday morning program where our students work with the middle and high schoolers from Trenton. But one of the things we do is train them to use the equipment, the sound and the lighting equipment, at the request of the teacher in the Trenton High School, who's like, we don't really have either the teaching time or the equipment to teach the students to use this stuff, but these are marketable skills. So actually, we just started this week an amazing program run by Tess James, who's a huge part of my life, which is a little bit like the Roundabout Workforce Development Program, where you bring kids who've graduated from high schools in the local area. And it's a training program which has job skills and sort of job readiness, but also teaches people to use lighting and sound equipment. And the hope is that both that they gain marketable skills from it, and then also that they become part of the workforce pool for the university and surrounding areas, because actually we need more people who know how to mix a soundboard or run, program the lights or work in kind of live entertainment in various ways. There's actually a dearth of people around here who have that skill set. So we are super blessed at Princeton that we are not just allowed, but kind of encouraged to use our resources with these other communities and fold the students in. So the students are, the Princeton students are also learning teaching skills, community skills, all kinds of things by participating as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think it's a pretty unique situation.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say we had Jordan Gilliam, who's an audio person from Pittsburgh, doing something similar to them, but it's not connected to a university. It's just a nonprofit. And then Asia Jackson in Massachusetts or in Boston, there's a nonprofit called Brighter Boston, and it's similar. It has similar veins where it's like, how do we connect the people to learn these things with the equipment and the people that can teach them?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, in the design world, I've also been involved in Design Action, which, we were most active during the pandemic, but that's been a meaningful piece of my life too. I've met a lot of wonderful young designers through that and been able to have a bit of a hand in helping shift the demographics a little bit, which has been wonderful.
Yeah, well, and Design Action has a bunch of resources, which they're linked in the artisticfinance.com/resources. In those resources, Design Action is one of those. And the Instagram for Design Action has a link of it has links to all these helpful documents. So anyway, Design Action is awesome. And the resources that they have are incredible and free and accessible online if anybody needs them. But I'm not spelling them out right now, but just know that they're awesome.
Thanks for calling that out. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing is you had said, in paying assistants and associates to work, that's you producing the show. I totally agree. And we had Natalie Robin, who co-wrote Theater Work, talking about labor in theater.
Yes.
And in their study, they discovered that the number one subsidy to the arts was people like designers paying their assistants extra out of their fees. Yeah. And or volunteering extra time where it's like, you should be paid for this time, but we instead volunteer and go in extra and do all this. And it was by far the amount.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Yeah. I did not know that. That makes so much sense.
Okay, Jane, this is a new segment, and so I don't know if it applies to you, but hopefully maybe it does. And this is called Real Numbers. And it's talking about the actual fee that you got on a recent project. So do you have a project you could share with us?
Totally. And it might be useful to share more than maybe two side by side because they're very different, right? Everything is so different. Is that too complicated?
Yeah, that's great. No, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. So I have two projects in mind. So I just did this spring Cosi fan tutti at LA Opera, and the fee was $13,000 to design the opera. And I also co-designed Teeth the Musical with Stacey Derosier, who's amazing, who you should have on your show. So I got half the fee, which was $2,800. So the total fee was, I should be able to do that math, right? $5,600.
$5,600, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Did you have to negotiate for either of those? Were there other things outside of that fee that you needed to negotiate? And or do you have an agent? It's not a question if I've asked you.
Yes, you haven't asked, but I do have an agent. I'm with United Talent Agency with Patrick Harold and Michael Griffo, and they've been amazing. For many years, I was with Mickey Rolfe, which was a small kind of bespoke designers agency. And then they folded in the pandemic. So now I'm with UTA, and they've been great. So they do the negotiating, and I've only joined up with them, since I also had a full-time job. So I'm paying a little bit less attention than I was when I was totally freelance to the negotiations. They think about it on my behalf a lot of the time. They're like, shouldn't you ask for? Whereas when I was freelance, I was always like combing through for the.
Well, okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
Design Action.
Yeah.
Elsa Hiltner, one of the resources is Elsa Hiltner's Google Doc of every state, and people anonymously go in and put the fees that they got paid at institutions or at jobs.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then also, like, if there was extra things, like, is there an assistant or what are the resources?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just something. If anybody is out there solo on their own, that document is really helpful. I'm going to link that specific one in the show notes because it's really
great.
Good.
Fantastic.
But, okay, so for either of these projects, did you need to negotiate anything extra?
On the LA Opera project, there was no drafting assistant. There was no assistant money included. And sometimes in opera, that means that the in-house person does it. And that's wonderful because they know exactly what their crew want, So that's great when that happens. But they were not offering that in this case. And we were only able to get another $1,000 for drafting assistants, which is obviously not enough to do a large light plot for an opera, which I think in the end cost around $3,000. But they paid $1,000. Yeah.
Okay, so they paid you an extra $1,000 to get it drafted. It cost $3,000 or so. How do you pay for drafting?
Well, it depends because most of the time these days I work with the wonderful Tess James, who's been my associate and kind of co-pilot, and we do a lot of co-designing, and we do a lot of. She also works at Princeton now, and so she is the only person that I work on a kind of flat fee with. Typically, I pay people by the hour for drafting.
So for this one specifically, was it a $3,000 flat fee, or were you paying by hourly? And that's
no, actually, now you're asking me that question. I'm remembering because I've been thinking about this, but I was wrong. So I actually hired someone who had worked with me on the opera at San Francisco Opera, and I paid them by the hour, and I think the total in the end, but I think it was $3,600 in the end of the day.
Got it. So then the $13,000 you got paid, you took $2,600 of that.
$2,600, yeah,
and paid it to get it drafted.
Correct.
Okay.
And that makes the LA Opera fee kind of lower than other opera companies of its size because of that. I mean, 10 to 15 seems fairly standard for those larger opera companies in this country, but typically they are covering one way or another, covering the drafting of the light plot, or you don't have to draft a light plot because it's a rep,
Yeah, got it. Also, I love that we're saying $3,600 because, the highest fee I've ever been paid for a show was $6,000.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think $4,000. And so it's like $3,600. When we're just talking about how much work goes into designing, it's so when I'm getting paid I did a show recently for $1,460 or $1,480.
Yeah.
And it's so I am subsidizing, just by drafting alone, I am subsidizing thousands of dollars to the company that's only paying me $1,480.
100%. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just talking out loud because sometimes maybe I will shame myself into switching careers or advocating for myself more.
No, I think it's so important to talk about it out loud. I think when I started in my career, the other thing is there have always been a fair number of people who had financial backing in this field, in this country, and I think early in my career, I thought that I was the problem because I couldn't figure out how everyone else was going out for dinner every night. you know? And it was like, there was absolutely, in retrospect, I'm like, there is no way that anyone who's actually living on this money is going out to dinner ever. Just ever. You know, like, bring your rice and beans if you're lucky. But, you know, go out to dinner and spend like $30. Like, absolutely not on a design fee. You know?
Okay, but I'm so glad you're saying this too, because I have always struggled with that, where I'm like, I feel like I'm being antisocial or whatever, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm just like, oh, I'm not going to go to dinner. But it's like, I can't
Right.
afford to go
No,
to
you
dinner.
can't.
And even when I was assisting on Broadway, which is like supposedly the best, one of the higher paying things you're going to get.
Right.
But I remember on the last show I assisted on, like a bunch of people from the line team would always be going out. But I was like, hey, can't we go to Taco Bell?
Yeah, well, totally. Totally.
And like once a week, maybe they would go to Taco Bell. And they're like, okay, Ethan, you can come with us because we're going to Taco Bell. But it's just like this weird thing where I'm like, I'm not going to go out and spend, even if I only spend like $25 somewhere. It's still
Right.
like, it adds like, what's that for the week? What's that for 6 days? And that's just for
Right.
dinner. Like, we're not even talking about the lunch break
And
or
the
the coffee. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, Jane,
totally.
I'm glad since you're a Broadway designer and you have this cushy Princeton gig. I'm glad that you're saying those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just, you know, it was a real struggle for a really long time.
All right, now for the Teeth musical,
Yeah.
did you need to negotiate anything extra?
Well, I wanted to bring that one up because I thought it was really interesting because I mean, what the one thing that's really positive, right, is that like in New York and the off-Broadway contracts, like assistants and associates have been kind of recognized in a way that they weren't. And that, again, thank you to the union for that. Um, and so it was very interesting. So this is Playwrights Horizons, who is a theater that I love. And I think they try very hard to do their best, you know, artistically and by the people that work there. But the agreement that we had, Stacey and I together, was to pay a total of $6,000 to an assistant of the designer's choice. And it was up to us then to figure out how much to pay them by the hour. I thought that was fascinating. They were like, here's $6,000. You decide. We think of this as $15 an hour by X number of hours, and that should cover you. And I'm like, nobody can live on $15 an hour in New York City. I mean, people do get by, so I shouldn't say that. There are people getting by, but, you know, not in ways that we should be asking people to live, let's put it that way. And so, you know, I came up with the figure of $30 an hour as a kind of minimum for survival for a young person with roommates, you know, living in Queens or whatever, to get by in New York City. So that immediately cut the number of hours that we could have that person in half. And that not including paying the person who was going to draft it, who was someone with significantly more experience, who I was going to pay $50 an hour to. So I thought that was sort of a fascinating thing, which is why I wanted to bring it up here. It's like it was new to me. Like, we have this much money, but you must pay them by the hour, but you decide how much you pay them by the hour.
I'm wondering if that's like the new off-Broadway thing of like doing the hour worksheets that you're supposed to do, or you have the option of doing. So maybe that's why they had to clarify, like, we need to know how many hours, or we all need to specify the hours.
And also, then, if you're paying people like that, when you pay them more than 40 hours in a week, you have to pay them overtime, right? Which then adjusts the number of hours. So that makes it that much more complicated to figure out, like, how much you should be paying them by the hour. And I think we decided, since Stacey and I were co-designing it, we decided that the simple answer in that case was we just wouldn't ask them to work more than 40 hours a week, which I think was, you know, ultimately good for everybody. But only possible because Stacey and I were co-designing it, you know. So there was actually two of us there some of the time.
Yeah, but this like speaks to me because like I've never been able to get the assistants like enough money.
Right.
So I do the same thing where it's like I'm always cutting their hours. Like I am self-cutting their
Yes.
hours Because
Yes.
because the theater company is like, well, we're giving you that $1,500 for them, so like they can do the job. And it's like, yeah, but
Right, they're saying they can do 100 hours for that, and you're saying, like, "No, they can't." I mean, I'm sure it's cheaper in Missouri than it is in New York City, but still.
yeah. Anyway, but I like hearing other people suffering through this too, because it's like we have to choose as the designer to let them work less and potentially make our job harder, like pick up the slack for when they're not around.
Yeah, or figure out, where additional money is coming from to pay them.
Exactly. All right. This is all good. So, unless you have anything more to add on those two projects, I'm going to move on. So on my Patreon, yesterday I said, hey, I'm interviewing Jane Cox. Does anybody have any questions? So we have one, and I don't know if it applies, but you can decide to answer or say, I don't know how to answer this because I've worked in America. But the comment was that American theater people think that theater shows are produced too quickly and there isn't enough interaction with the designers in the rehearsal process. Can you ask Jane how she sees the differences between European and American theater processes?
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I would say that it's important to make a distinction between continental European processes and Irish and English. Like Irish and English processes, I think, have something in common, and I'm familiar with those. I think oftentimes when people say European, maybe what they mean is sort of German, French, like places where there's kind of state theater companies.
Swedish. So the question came from Cynthia, who's a costume designer and married to a Swedish person, and that's where they comment. So Sweden, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a lighting designer, the most distinct difference is that here lighting designers have mostly made it to kind of status parity with set designers, which is not really quite yet true in Ireland and England. I mean, I've always been treated very well over there, but I will say the set designers, it's still typical for the set designers to kind of show up with a basically finished set and be like, here, figure out how to light it. And that doesn't happen very much to me here anymore. Usually I get included earlier on. So in terms of the rehearsal process, I mean, they often have more time in the rehearsal room, but less time in tech and previews. So it's even more important as a designer. I mean, the thing I put on the header for my students at Princeton is like, go to rehearsal, go to rehearsal, go to rehearsal. It says that like 3 times at the top of the syllabus. It's even more important on the other side of the Atlantic because the tech and the preview process is much quicker. And I like that trade. It forces a little bit more simplicity with the tech process, but you're not sitting there for these. I feel like here sometimes it's a blessing, but most of the time you're like, oh my God, are we really going to sit here and tech this show for like 6 or 8 days, by which point the show ceases to be like a show and becomes this sort of, imaginary hellscape. And what I've liked about working in Ireland and England is typically you never forget that there's a show. You might tech it for a couple of days and then you run it. And you always remember that you're doing a show. Whereas here, you can really get in the weeds of like these extended tech processes. That said, you can't do a super complicated musical without taking that time. But it doesn't suit me kind of personally to do that because I very quickly forget what I'm actually doing. But I don't know if I have a great wisdom on this. I think, yeah. Thank you for the question, Cynthia.
Just because of the level of the theater in my career, I say you can tech a musical in a very short amount of time. Because I've done so many of those where it's like, you're just going to run it and you keep up. It's like, oh, great, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what kind of thing you're trying to do. But I'm more sort of, my personality is more suited to doing the quicker version and getting the audience in the door more quickly. But the actors have had more rehearsal time typically over there, and that's nice.
Yeah, I too. I'm like, get the audience in here because then they can focus on things that I'll be like, oh, all those things I was focusing on, not important. Should have just skipped all that.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. This is a question that I just have from reading your Wikipedia page.
Uh-huh.
And you've
Which
mentioned this
somebody
person, but
made last year, which was so nice. I was like, suddenly someone sent it to me. I was like, gosh, it's such a nice, well, I haven't looked at it since, but someone sent it to me last year and they were like, you have a Wikipedia page. I was like, that's delightful.
no, whoever did it did a really good job.
Didn't they? Thank you, whoever did it. And I couldn't figure out who did it. I'd like to say thank you to them. So thank you, whoever you were.
Because there's just certain things in it that like stood out to me as like, oh, somebody thought to include this thing that maybe someone else doing the Wikipedia page wouldn't have included. And one of the things that was included, you mentioned this person, Penny Remsen.
Yes.
And I just, I'm a nerd. I like the lighting archive and all this and the lineage of lighting. But can you tell us more about this person?
Absolutely. And it's a perfect time to tell you more about Penny Remsen because Penny Remsen literally just retired like 2 weeks ago. So Penny Remsen is a lighting designer who was the lighting professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and was there for a really long time because she was there when I did a junior year abroad there in 1991 and was also the chair of the program over many years, but just has this incredible lineage of design students. And, we talk about her a lot when we see each other. Ben Stanton always says he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. And if Penny had told him to be a plumber, he would have been a plumber. And I think a lot of us feel that way. But Penny was primarily focused. She's an amazing lighting designer. I assisted her, but never really kind of went out to look for a high-level professional career. I don't think she was interested. She loved teaching. She's an amazing teacher. And she focused just as much on your behavior, on sort of parenting, her undergraduates, as she did on your design work. And you just had to be kind of rigorous and hardworking and ethical, but also my daughter just came home. She's covered in pride flags. She looks amazing on all of face paint on her face. So I remember her telling me, well, the first time I took her baby light, what she called her baby lighting class. The first semester I was at UMass, I was really kind of impressed and intimidated by her. And she cornered me in the hallway after maybe like the third class. And she was like, you do not speak up enough in class. I think you have a lot to say. Speak. And this is the kind of thing she would do. She would kind of identify people's weaknesses, and then she would just like be relentless. Then she used to always tell me, don't giggle. Nobody will ever take you seriously if you giggle, which I was unable to stop doing. And if you showed up in her classroom and you hadn't like done the homework or read the play, she would be like, what are you doing here? You should leave. I mean, it was just like, she was just kind of, it is, I'm going to say, but it's probably mellowed out in her old age a bit, kind of relentless about you as a human being and how you kind of handled the work. And I think a lot of us really idolized her. She's an extremely direct human being, but you could tell even then when she was in her 30s, that it came from a deep well of love for her students. I mean, she says, I regret being so hard on some people. There were definitely people who she would say, do that, don't be and they wouldn't, for whatever reason, be able to kind of shape up, and she said to me recently, I regret some of that now. But I'm going to say for me, for Ben Stanton, for Justin Townsend, for any number of people I can think of, I think we all felt like somebody really saw us and thought that it was worth the time to really just be like, behave in this way. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you for telling us about that because I just felt like it was important because it was included in your Wikipedia page. And I was like, but I haven't heard this Penny name.
Yeah.
And I need to know. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, totally. And and I think people should know about her because there's a lot of really wonderful designers who are out there teaching now who studied with her. And she was also I'm making it sound like, it was just about people, and she was very focused on people, but she's also exceptionally good at coming up with lighting projects that really get to the heart of what it is to do lighting, so I learned an enormous amount in 2 semesters with her.
Amazing. All right. Okay. Let's wrap this up. Jane, you've given me over an hour and a half of your time.
It's been delightful.
2 more questions, which is regarding finances. What advice would you give to somebody who's starting out in their career right now?
Yeah, the same advice that Brian MacDevitt, who, by the way, is also an excellent person for the podcast, if you haven't had him yet. He gave us, when I was in grad school, he came in and he said the most important thing is to keep your overhead low. And that's true. That's just true. Like, as low, it's an underpaid field. You won't be able to take the design opportunities that are underpaid that you have to take if you're going to move through this field if you have a high overhead. So keep your overhead as low as you can. If you can have roommates, you should have roommates. If you're starting out in your career in a less glamorous part of town, whatever you can do. And it is exponentially more difficult in American cities than it was when I started. But still, like, whatever you can do, don't go out to dinner. Live with a bunch of other people. Like, keep your overhead low for a few years. Because, one of the things about this field is it is so challenging outside of the rewards of the work that most people stop doing it in their early 30s. And so there is an element, if you're really committed to it, there's an element of simple attrition, which is like, if you're still there, if you're still standing at 40, you probably have a career because the other people who have related levels of experience have left and they're doing something else.
I love it. I'm 3 years to 40, so if I can make it.
I think you're doing great. You're doing great. Well, look at this. Podcast, you should figure out how to make money from.
But I love you saying that because that is a recurring trend, and that advice has been given to us from people that have been in the career for 15, 20, 30, 50 years is keep the overhead low.
Yep.
So I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Where can people connect with you, and who do you want to connect with you?
So the easiest way to find me is at my Princeton email address. It's also the email account I read the most often, which is Jane Cox at princeton.edu. And I love connecting with young people. I don't have a lot of extra time because I have students of my own and I'm involved in design action and I have a kind of pool of, young people, assistants and associates that I work with. So forgive me, I don't always have time, but I always eventually get back to someone when they write to me. I'm happy to hear from people. Often, actually, the easiest way for me to interact with a young person is if they can come and sit in a tech somewhere when I'm doing a tech. And because of the Princeton job, that's sometimes only once or twice a year. But I'm always happy if the director is up for it to have just a rotating cast of young people come sit in and ask questions. Yeah, so please feel free to reach out. And just forgive me if it takes weeks or sometimes months to get back to you. I actually always eventually get around to responding to your email. But sometimes, there's a huge backlog.
We understand. We all understand. All right, Jane, this was incredible. Thank you so much for being so willing to do this and for giving me so much time. I had a great time. I could listen to you talk for like 7 more hours.
You're very sweet.
Thank you so much.
I'm very grateful for you doing this. I think it's such a service to the field. So congratulations. And I have so many more to listen to as well that I'm really looking forward to. So much appreciated.
Awesome. Well, you've given me so many suggestions like Brian MacDevitt and Stacey Derosier, and there was some others that I'll have to have those people on, and then you'll have more to listen to.
Fantastic.
All right. Thank you, Jane.
Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
That's it for our absolutely incredible interview with Jane Cox. My takeaways are keeping overhead low. So from Brian MacDevitt, who mentioned it to Jane Cox, who's now mentioning it to us, we learn once again that you have to keep your overhead low. Now, we touched a bit on privilege and how people who can afford to take low-paying design fees and at the same time live in New York City are going to have a better chance of working in the career longer. But regardless of privilege level, keeping overhead low is the number one thing you can do to be able to choose the career you want. If you're a longtime listener, you might remember way back on episode 3, writer Jill Twiss mentioned that she made roughly $15,000 for several years when she first moved to New York City. Now, she was able to do it because she was simultaneously able to keep her overhead low. Penny Remsen, one of Jane's lighting mentors. I am so appreciative of Penny, who I have never met, but has trained a number of superstar lighting designers. On Broadway right now, students that Penny trained have designed shows, including Maybe Happy Ending, Moulin Rouge, Just in Time, Death Becomes Her, and one of them was the assistant designer on Wicked, which has been running for more than 20 years. Now, that's just on Broadway. And then if we take Jane Cox, who learned from Penny, and then look at the people that Jane Cox has mentored, there's even more shows on Broadway right now. And then in addition to all of this, there are dozens of students of Penny that are working as designers and technicians, etc., in regional theater or international places. And I'm mentioning this because Penny isn't a household name, and yet lighting designers don't just materialize out of nowhere. No one is born as a lighting designer. They learn that from somewhere. So we could attribute all of this to luck, or maybe that Massachusetts is a good location for people that are going to head to New York City to work. But I would argue that having a solid lighting foundation is extremely important. And like Jane said, yes, knowing the lighting part is important, but knowing how to conduct yourself is equally, if not more, important. So thank you, Penny, for putting so much good lighting work out into the world. Paying for assistance and drafting out of the design fee. Now in theater, because design fees are typically not huge, this is something that's a bummer to do, pay for drafting. But when the company or the theater doesn't have a budget for it, it has to happen and it has to get paid for by the designer. And financially, it's important because it's not always a set fee, especially if you're doing what Jane does and you're paying hourly to get this done. Paying theater designers hourly, now that's just a dream that Jane and I think could happen. I don't really have any thoughts on it other than I'm just going to say it out loud. I'm just putting the idea out into the ether. And my final takeaway is thank you, Jane, for sharing the design fee for that LA Opera gig, which was $13,000 minus the $3,600 for drafting, and then also that $2,800 co-design fee with Stacey Derosier. This one makes me feel not as much of a sham when I go and design something for $1,480, but it also touches on the fact that if you're going to design theater off-Broadway, you really need to, once again, keep that overhead low because the fees are not going to reach a meaningful wage. And note that Stacey and Jane put more time and energy into this show to ensure that their assistant wasn't overextended. All right. Thank you, Jane, for such a candid interview. I had such a good time, and I am so appreciative that you did that. Now, I mentioned at the top that I am looking for investors for False Steps, a ballroom comedy. Now, we're running the month of September at the theater at St. Clemens. I am also the lighting designer for this show, which is actually why this episode got released a little late, because I've been working on that light plot, which I still have to make some modifications to bring it in within budget. Now, the budget is important to me on this go-round because I am an associate producer on the show. And that means that I am responsible for bringing in investors. And specifically, I have to bring them in by August, which is really soon. Now, I still have about $15,000 to raise. So if you would be interested in investing $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000, do reach out to me. Now, this is a developmental production, and that means that this is front money. And because of that, We don't necessarily have incentives like opening night tickets, etc. But I assure you, if you do invest with me, I'm going to make sure you get to opening or a final dress. I'll even let you write a light cue if you want to, as long as it's a good cue. If it's a bad cue, then maybe we have to reimburse the investment and just part ways. But anyway, if you want to get involved by putting some investment into the show, the most direct way to get a hold of me is by email at artisticfinancepodcast@gmail.com, and I will share more details with you. And the last thing I'll say about investing is I haven't had any takers on this option, but I'm hoping that some of the people who do invest will be willing to come on the podcast and talk about that experience. So if that is something of interest to you, please let me know. And a reminder that tickets are now on sale for the show. I guarantee you'll have an awesome time because 1, it's funny, and 2, there are 4 big ballroom dance sequences, which are amazing. Our choreographer, Ronnie Dutra, is fantastic, and the dancers that are in our cast are also amazing. So if you want to see the show, get your tickets at falsestepscomedy.com. Now, if you're not interested in investing in the show and you're not able to see the show in September, but you are still jazzed that I am crazy enough to talk about finances on a public podcast, you can support me in that regard and keep Artistic Finance on the air. And you can do that by becoming a Patreon patron. Right now, we have early releases available for our episode with the choreographer of The Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof, Stash Kmiec, and our interview with Broadway lighting programmer Brad Gray. To support me and get those early releases, visit patreon.com/artisticfinance. The dad joke to end the episode is maybe not a good one, but it is at least in honor of False Steps, a ballroom comedy, and the 4th of July. And here it is. What was the most popular dance in 1776? Independence. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.